Hey everyone, it's time for another episode of the Cutlass Podcast. Welcome back. If you're a new listener or a new viewer on YouTube, welcome. I hope you enjoy this channel. I hope you enjoy the content you're going to hear, and I hope you find it useful to your personal and professional development. That's the goal. So on the podcast side, there are over 50 other episodes, and there's a growing portfolio of videos on the YouTube channel. That one is called Paul's Cutlass Classroom, or you can find it. The handle is at Paul's Cutlass Classroom. So check that out. I'll continue to build videos in there, but the audio podcast is definitely content-wise, got a lot more episodes out there. And then, of course, welcome back to my subscribers, loyal listeners, and watchers. Thanks for your support and feedback. Thanks for the comments and the feedback you provide. I do read those. I'm getting my YouTube chops down now, so I am responding. Some of those are a couple years old, but I'm like, I guess I better respond to these. So I'm starting to do that now. And I have taken the feedback to work into episodes or concepts for future episodes. So thanks for doing that. So today we're going to dive a bit into the topic of coaching and performance feedback. For those of you who have a Petty Officer's Guide, this is chapter 5, which is specifically about coaching and performance feedback. And then also in the Chief Petty Officer's Guide, chapter 7, training and developing our reliefs, covers this kind of perspective of leadership and management of personnel. So back with me is Force Master Chief and friend Toby Ruiz. You've seen him on several episodes now. Advice on becoming a kick-ass speaker. He just did So You Want to Become a Senior Enlisted Leader with me. So he's back. I think he's great for these kind of conversations. And again, he is the Command Master Chief of the Navy's Leadership and Ethics Center. They develop all the leadership curriculum for the enlisted side and the officers, frankly, on the up there, and that whole curriculum. So if you want to know what they're doing with performance feedback, he is shaping it. He's working the educational curriculum with his team, so he's perfect to talk about this topic. So Toby, welcome back. How you doing?
Doing great, my man. It's I love these more and more each day. Pretty soon, I'm gonna just ask you if I could be part of every episode here. All
Hey,
the
that might be. I've really thought about that. Right? It's so getting guests is cool, but that's the most not complicated, but trying to schedule things with a guest and trying to find guests, and somewhere across time zones and things like that. So that can be the most difficult and frustrating part of it. So hey, I'm all about having repeat guests that know their stuff. So I'll absolutely take you up on that. So all right, so let's jump in again. Fundamentals. I love to always start with words. So coaching is defined as the process of when an individual works with a trained or experienced professional in a process of self-discovery and self-awareness towards performance improvement. So working together, that coach helps the individual identify their strengths and develop their goals. That's the definition of this thing. But Toby, why, from your experience and your perspective and what you're doing, is this such an important aspect of developing leaders and developing people and teams?
Well, without a good head coach, a team can go nowhere. And you can apply that to any analogy you want, whether it's sports, whether it's business, whether it's whatever situation you are. It's a powerful communication technique for leaders to be able to use. And when the coach helps people identify what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and how they can use those to get to developing goals, then it allows the coaches and the coachees or mentees, if you want to call them that, to be declarative if they need to. It to help them shape the conversation the way it needs to be held. Sometimes you have to be more directive. Sometimes you have to be more facilitative, but it helps shape those conversations. You're able to really embody a set of abilities and on what they have in addition to what they need to be able to work on. And that also includes things like their values, their characteristics, their ethics. Um, when individuals work on these items to make themselves better, then obviously you think about it when they all do their part, how that contributes to the team. And then the coach is able to recognize how to take each of those strengths and those weaknesses of the whole team and just get them to that next level. So again, very foundational kind of a trait to have, ability to have, but probably one of the most important.
Yeah, and it's a proactive you're not just sitting there waiting, right? Or you're not a delegating at this point. We'll talk a little bit, but um, yeah, offering that guidance to help them stay on track with their strengths or continue to build on their strengths, identifying weaknesses and strengthening those as well. And I think it ultimately leads to efficiency and personal growth, right? Without a good coach, you can keep, take it to a golf swing, right? So I could work on my swing. When I played golf, I just went out and learned on my own swing, right? I didn't have any coaching. And then you ingrained bad habits. And then it took someone, I decided to get some coaching, and they were able to identify, right? If I would have had that up front, they would have picked that out, and I would have been a lot better, a lot faster. So if
Yeah.
you look at it from growth efficiency, I think they help definitely do that. And then I think good coaching helps to proactively approach avoiding problems in the future, right? So you're having these constant course corrections or this constant feedback, and it goes into that. So, all right, so I don't care if it's military, civilian. What are the attributes of some of the best coaches you've worked for, seen, or admired over your career or life?
So I think probably the most important one is somebody cannot be judgmental. It's what you see is what you get with each of the people that you're trying to coach, and not being judgmental in what they can and probably what they can't do. Instead, again, they have to be a great listener. They have to be able to listen and understand where that person or that team is at the given time, and actually listen. Not be the one that constantly interrupts or tries to make a point about something that they without hearing the whole story first. I think is really important, and I don't think we do that enough as listeners in general. We hear enough to think about what we want to do, and then we get in that conversation or make a decision a little prematurely. I think a good coach also has to have great what we call emotional intelligence. They have to be able to read what's going on in front of them. Again, not prejudge, but just, make sure that they have everything they need to assess a particular situation before going into it. Um, I will also tell you, and I think a lot of people are afraid to be coached because they don't want to share their vulnerabilities. It's the pride in us, oh, I'm not weak in that area, or come off as, I know more than I don't, and not, they're afraid to actually show that they may not know a lot in a particular area, and why that coaching is going to be important. I've seen coaches ask challenging questions. I've seen lots of coaches also ask reflective questions. Make folks forcing that individual or forcing that team to look back at yourself and make them realize that, the strengths or the weaknesses they have to contribute to that team or to the end result they're going to. So not just challenging, but reflective questions. And I've also seen probably more times than not, many coaches who are not afraid to give me feedback, not afraid to tell me I suck, not afraid to tell me, hey, man, that probably wasn't the right thing to do, or that wasn't the right, you could have done better here or there. And again, I think people, they let their pride or they let their ego get in the way. And, you got to be able to tell that like it is. And it's hard sometimes to be able to do that. But I think the effective coaches, the good coaches, people that gravitate to them are the ones that are going to give them that feedback that people need to hear.
Awesome. Yeah, I wrote down a few things as well. I wrote down experienced, right? So I would expect they're experienced in the thing they're coaching. That goes without saying, but um, heck, and we'll talk a little bit about sports coaching versus workplace coaching. There are differences, right? But I took on the role a couple of years ago as a volunteer soccer coach. I'd played soccer like one season when I was like 10 years old. So I was like, I don't think I'm the guy to be the coach. And they're like, no, you'll learn it. So I jumped on YouTube. And then we were dealing with 7-year-olds, so I could get away with it. But I would not be the guy you're going to take up to like a high school level soccer coach. I think they serve as good role models. I think the best coaches I've seen on or off the field have passion and energy, right, about what they do, and they translate that to me individually or to the team. and they see something in myself and they encourage me to do more, then I think they bring out the best in me. I think they're authentic. So you can tell when they're not, right? Like, you can't be coaching me if it's just not coming from an authentic place. That will not resonate with me or with people. And then another thing I wrote down, I think they're good storytellers.
Yeah.
So in some way or another, they can take their experience and they just don't direct it at you. They put it in a context and they weave it into a good story that captures my attention. Um, they can talk about the situation, the potential outcomes of the strengths, the potential outcomes of the weaknesses, and those kind of things. So those are a couple of things I wrote down. So coaching is also, as I've covered in prior episodes and we were discussing prior to hitting the record button, is one of the stages of situational leadership. You and I discussed, like, hey, at least on the Navy, one of the reasons I talk about this so much is you and I grew up under leadership development framework that taught us situational leadership. I remember not just learning about it at the Senior Enlisted Academy, but learning at it, and other things. Glenn Mallow, who's a buddy of mine, a fellow nuke, he's definitely a student of situational leadership as well, and he was a guest on several episodes. But coaching comes right after the directing stage. So let's talk about how coaching falls into that, right? How do you assess a person's willingness and ability to be, led with a coaching style instead of their directing style, and how are those different? And then once you're at the, coaching style, when do they mature? How do you know they're mature enough to where you're going to shift to the supporting style?
Dude, I was so excited when you were telling me about situational leadership and how we were going to tie coaching into this, because this is right back to, like you said, you and I were products of the old sit lead model
Yeah.
back even in NavLead, the Kersey and Blanchard model, if you will, the 4 stages, and just to kind of catch everybody up to make sure we're all on the same page. It was a tool that we used to assess people through certain tasks or situations at hand. And again, everybody goes through all 4 stages depending on what it is. It's not a person, more it's developed toward the task or the situation. It's an adaptive and a flexible tool based on where that person is at, to the situation that's at hand. And there's 2 parts to it. You had what we call the assessment models, or what we call the D model, the developmental levels from 1 to 4, that showed that either you were very new to something all the way up to very seasoned to it. And then the other part of that was the 4 leadership models that you would apply based on what that developmental level was. And Paul, you mentioned it, the 4 leadership levels: directing, coaching, supporting, delegating. You would use coaching when you have somebody who needs both high direction in something as well as high support. So in this kind of level, we call them the disillusional learners, if you will. These are people who are learning a new task and now know enough to know all the steps to get through that certain task or that certain situation. But because they're still learning, their attitude is they're disillusioned. They're like, man, why did I learn all this stuff? I'm never going to be able to do this. And they just need confidence. As we say, sets and reps, they need the more reps than anything. So when you're coaching somebody through this, you have to provide both that high level of direction and that high level of support. So to make sure that, they get both the competence and the commitment side of the house. And that's a very tough role sometimes for coaches, because you got to keep them motivated. You got to keep them encouraged to keep doing what they need to get that task or situation accomplished. But there's going to be a time that, after they've done this a little bit, after your coaching and your involvement with them, that they're going to continue to get more sets and they're going to continue to get better at something. Whereas, they don't need you to encourage them as much anymore. And I think that's where you can back out of the coaching role a little bit and just more of the supporting, to be there when they need you, instead of that consistent rah cheerleading, helping them, get through the sets and reps all the time. The other side of situational leadership is, as much as you can progress through all 4 stages, you could also regress. And so there are some times where, again, coaching, you're leaving it to them. You gave them the knowledge, you're supporting them. But if they, for some reason, regress back to what we call an S1 leader or a directing role, now you're not going to be as supportive as much as you're just going to be giving them more and more direction. Not what we look for in coaches. Sometimes you may need to recognize that to be able to keep that conversation and relationship going.
Yeah, and I think that's where when I talk about off the field and on the field coaching, the coaching, the activity of coaching versus if I'm a positional coach who's working through situational leadership, right? So I could have the title coach, right? I'm the boss of the team, but I could be in a directing leadership style, or I
Sure.
could be a coach, the boss of the team, and be in a supporting or delegating style. And you'll see that in professional teams, right? You'll see, watch soccer compared to NFL football, right? Where there's more complex play calling, right? There's a lot coming in. There is direction given to the team, but in some cases, there is some delegation given to the quarterback. Where you look at a soccer team, a lot of that is the coach is very laissez faire, hands back, and the team is at a high level, right? So they're really just delegated the play call to them. They've discussed. But when you're in the workplace, this coaching thing, the skill I'm talking about is the actual, coaching the individual on their performance. Um, so in the petty officers guide, I wrote, and I collaborated with you guys on this too. So, you talk about performance feedback and counseling, mentoring and coaching, right? They're all kind of interrelated. I think they all involve the process of giving feedback, right? It's just how you're going to do it and what context and who's giving feedback to who. So let's dive into that a little bit. What's the differences between performance feedback, coaching and mentoring, and or where do they kind of blend together?
Well, I think let's start first with feedback, if you will. Again, it's an absolute must in any and everything that we do. Feedback does so much for both the coach as well as for those being coached. It's a report card of sorts, if you will. It shows where progress is being made, how improvements are being done, or not, depending on what the situation is. But without that feedback, you just can't, you're not going to know where you're at, let alone what are we going to do to either improvement or, or to stay the course of what we're doing. That it gives you a chance to remember things, to reflect on things, to refrain, and sometimes for some people they need to relearn things as well. So that's why I think feedback extremely important there. Um, we I think the most important thing with feedback, we can't be afraid of it. And I think sometimes, in Paul, you and I have talked about this a few times, that we sometimes our egos get in our way. Sometimes that our reputation, why we think that our reputation may be hurt because of some some improvement feedback that we get that we don't think we really needed. We can't be afraid of any feedback that is given to us. And the beauty about, and I know we'll talk a little bit about mentorship and coaching here in a second, but I think the other important thing to remember with feedback, performance feedback, hey man, this is nothing personal. This is all business. This is all ways we are working ourselves to making sure that we are making ourselves better for the performance of the team, for the mission completion and mission tasks at hands that we have, and not to take anything personal. It's all business.
And another part with feedback, and again, I think it's the broader umbrella of these other activities and roles or responsibilities in some case. They're not just boss or leader down, right? You coach and provide feedback, right? Up, right? You can provide that to your boss. You can provide coaching and feedback side to, across to your peers. Yes, primarily you're doing it down. And then ultimately with feedback, you're coaching yourself, right? It's a leading self attribute. So just don't view these things, performance feedback, coaching, and mentoring. You can offer those in any direction and they can be received. I can suck in a certain activity and have a very junior personnel coach me in
Yes.
something using a technology like this, right? I've relied on quote unquote more junior people or younger people who are much more adept, experienced, to know and be able to offer the advice and guidance, and then also to be able to watch me and assess my performance. So,
And
and
if
I
I
and
could add something to that, and that's a very important thing that you bring up, because And again, in the senior enlisted leader levels that we are at here, and where we talk about a lot with command master chiefs, CMCs, we wouldn't be CMCs if we didn't lead down. Obviously, we know how to lead down. As you get more accustomed to our role, obviously leading up, being able to talk to our COs, our XOs, give them some of that coaching and feedback they need. One thing that we're not very good at least at the CMC level, and this is one of the reasons why we created our advanced CMC course here in Newport, that many second tour plus will come back and get some additional training on. We're not very good at talking to each other peer to peer, especially those that are going to become ISIC CMCs. And let's say you own 6 units within your boss owns 6 units within your Desron or wing, whatever it is, and you have some really good high performers, and then you got some not so good high performers. Well, your level of giving feedback is going to change very drastically based on that. So again, being able to recognize who you're talking to, what those strengths and weaknesses are, and not be afraid to communicate that out, so that there's that expectation of what we need to do to get better. And even your high performing teams and individuals still need to be coached, because they could still be better. They can still get better along the way. And so you're absolutely right in the terms of anybody can be a coach. Just like everybody can receive feedback, and I think that's important on both levels.
Yeah, and another note, through this conversation that came up is having the ability to assess. So a good coach needs to be able to watch and assess, and that goes back to my experience points. I got to have the experience and knowledge to know what right looks like, to know what bad looks like or wrong looks like, and then to be able to assess my performance against those metrics, not just made up ones, but experienced ones that you know that are measured against a success metric, right? Yeah. So, all right. So coaching and mentoring, how are these two things different?
So I like to look at it, coaching and mentoring, obviously two different ways. When you are mentoring somebody, and again, a lot of those traits that we've already talked about, I think from a mentoring standpoint is when you are saying, "Hey, learn from me, learn from this is what I kind of have to offer," and it's more of that direct type of conversation, where that role. I'm transferring knowledge, or I'm giving you experience that's specifically for me based on what I know. Back to your point as well. In terms of driving development, I will give advice. I will say, hey, from me or I in our types of conversations. Usually as a mentor, I also hope to be kind of that SME, or at least know where those references are at, to be that subject matter expert that people need me to provide them. And when I'm mentoring, I'm kind of giving them that direction. And then again, the other thing about mentoring is it kind of comes and goes. I think depending on what specifically somebody is looking for, the goal is always to have good, consistent comms with your mentor. And sometimes you may just call your mentor not to get anything specific from them, other than to have a conversation, other opportunities for feedback, if you will. Mentoring, learning from me. I think when you're doing this in a coaching role, as the coach, I think you learn with me together. Let's learn together. Let's figure this out. Something that facilitates where I'm giving you things that you can grow. I can grow with you on this, making me smarter as well. Kind of a more team type of effort. Expanding that self-awareness that you were talking about. Um, Unlike where I'm mentoring, it's more straight from me. When you're a coach, you're asking a lot of open-ended questions. You're asking them to be reflective. You're asking them to think back on things that can help guide them to that decision or to that learning point that they're trying to get to. And again, as that coach, I don't have to be the expert. I don't have to be that person that knows everything there, as long as I'm able to continuously challenging them to get back to learning where that information is at, be that active listener, be that empathetic person for them when they need that. And then continuously ask, those powerful, challenging questions again to make them think back on what they need to think on to be able to move forward in their goals, what they're shooting for.
Yeah, and with coaching, definitely there's a positional piece to it, right? It's a responsibility that goes with my role as a leader or a manager. It may not be written, but if you have people that work for you or a team that works for you, I'm sure you want to unleash the potential of that thing. So you're going to have to be able to stand back, right? Assume people know their responsibilities, and this gets into situational leadership, right? Are they willing and capable of performing the things you're tasked to? Most people should be, but you still have to watch the outcomes of that team performance and then be able to come in, with each individual or the collective group. And again, you're assessing the performance and then offering the feedback to get to enhance the performance of the team. So even again, I agree, high performing teams. I did this a lot as a nuke when, and Glenn Mallon and I did this, on enterprise running drill teams. As a drill team leader, I saw myself as a coach of that watch team. They had a, engineering officer of the watch and a watch supervisor. That was their team leadership, but we came in and put them through reps and sets. So that's another thing that goes with coaching, this kind of, getting your people through reps and sets and then assessing performance, giving the feedback, adjusting, and then let's do it again.
Yeah.
And get better the next time, and taking them through the stages of walk, crawl, run. A mentor, I think, is more, hey, let's look forward, right? Like, hey, you're strong in these areas. It's not, my boss is usually not my mentor, right? It's someone on the outside that, a trusted agent I can go to. And I'm getting this feedback. What do you think? Like, yeah, I see those attributes, or if you get some, strong performance feedback that hurts your feelings, the mentor, like, hey, you got to get over that, right? So that's that kind of brotherly, kind of fatherly kind of advice kind of thing. And then there's still, I think there should still be, some of the same attributes. I've been there, done that, but I think it's a softer approach per se, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that a good coach is able to do is, again, especially back in your example where you're talking about you and Glenn leading these different watch teams and stuff, where you recognize you got weaknesses, and good coaches are able to pair them up. Maybe they'll shift that watch team up a little bit, put the weaker ones with the stronger ones, so that again you have a little bit of that interaction going on. Makes the strong people stronger by knowing how to handle the ones that may not be as strong and get them up to speed. And coaches just have that knack. They have that eye for being able to see in the bigger picture where the teams are going to most benefit from how they use in each other.
Yep. And then just back to, we haven't gone into here, but, read through the guides on the leadership side or the episodes I've done on inspiration or on influence tactics, right? So good coaches know how to use those influence tactics, right? So they know when to use an inspirational appeal. They know when to come in with pressure when they need to, right? They know when to negotiate if they need to. And if you watch it, right, you'll see different settings, but I compare, being a watch supervisor at a nuclear power plant to a football game, right? We both do some kind of pre-evolutionary get together and discussion, right? Like we have a plan. There's some, hype. There's some review of things. There's some encouragement. There's some, hey, I know you can do a great job. Remember not to do this. Remember the things we worked on. Let's not do these bad things. And then you're on the field and you're going, and you're watching, right? As a watch supervisor, I'm watching that watch team. I'm watching them do what they need to do. When I need to nudge a little bit on performance, I give it. Same on the football team, like we've talked about. That team is constantly getting feedback. Those players do a play, they come off the side, they get that feedback, and hopefully adjust to enhance performance on the next play. And then usually at the end of the event, whatever it is, you huddle the team again, and there's that debrief thing. If you do well, there's encouragement, reinforcement, you're using praise and all those things. You're still going to praise even if you don't do well. You're not going to beat them down. You can express frustration in these kind of things. But again, your ability to work through different influence tactics at these different stages of the evolution or the event you're coaching through are extremely important. And I think you'll agree, you've done this too. It is rewarding when you work with a team and just watch them build through and watch the skills develop, right? I'm getting, when I was told about that soccer role, my wife told me, you'll be okay. You'll learn it. It's only 6 and 7 year olds, but you're going to get much more out of this than they will. and
Yep.
she was right. Right. So, what are your thoughts on that?
No, no, absolutely. And I think, the feedback that you were just you were talking about, when the team goes again, you can tell a well coached team when it comes to giving and receiving that feedback. One of the things that I would always, in a coaching role that I would ask is, I'd always start hey, how do you think you did? How do you think, what were the goods in there? Get them started on that positive note first. And a lot of times, regardless of how well something's done, it's going to come up in conversation from their end. Yeah, but and then they'll identify something that, yeah, but I didn't do this one right, or I missed that block on that player, whatever it is you're talking about. And that's when you know that the coaching is really effective because of the sets and reps. They're not afraid for whatever's going to pop up. And then they're able to, again, take a look at themselves and say, yeah, we did pretty good, but I could still be better. And I think to me, that's the rewarding part, is that they're able to see and stay humble enough to know that, while we're doing good, we can still always get better with that, and the feedback flows back and forth to each other.
All right. So I think we've covered about how this, obviously performance feedback is weaved into the coaching function. So I'm good with that. So let's talk about, there's going to be times we've talked about coaching the team, but then there's going to be times like back to a football team. Sometimes the coach has to pull those players in the office, right? They're just not getting it for a variety of reasons, or attitude is off, or these other kind of things that are, it could be performance, it could be attitude related. And now we have to start having one-on-one kind of conversations. We'd call this counseling in the military, right? But it can be good and bad, right? It's just performance feedback again, right? So let's talk about those. What's it look like? What's your framework when you got to bring that person in and give them that one-on-one feedback / counseling session?
Um, so when you have to give, I hate, and one of the things that still to this day is, being the bearer of bad news, being the bearer of you know, when the conversation is kind of too quiet, or it's only me talking. um, those are tough situations to be in. Or I think we were talking a little bit earlier about when emotions overtake the conversation, or or attitudes take over a conversation, and now are we still kind of being productive, if you will? Um, I always start any of the sessions with, how do you feel you did? How did you think that went? How was your specific role? And give them an opportunity to kind of share with how they think they are doing. And a lot of times, especially in these tougher type of conversations, they may be thinking one thing, and you've got other news for them, completely opposite. So I like to use that to start those conversations first, to see kind of what state of mind they're in. Again, this is not personal. This is business. Kind of that expectation of how the conversation is, and then again, as a coach, what I want to do is identify what those shortfalls are, identify what needs to be worked on, and then try to get them to acknowledge it, but then two, what are they going to do to help correct that? And again, you get, just like what we talked about, coaching is kind of like Apple Maps or Google Maps, right? It gives you 3 or 4 different ways to get to the end. It's just up to you to be able to pick that. That's kind of those types of the same thing in a coaching type of a conversation. And when you get it from them, now you know that you're getting their buy-in, or you're getting their, that they have acknowledged of that, whatever that shortfall is. If it's quiet, or they're not willing to really talk, you may have to be more into that, giving specifics, back to that directing mode we talked about, to say, yeah, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. Give them enough to spark an idea, and then try it again to get back from them. What are they going to do to make themselves better? That's usually how I like to approach those coaching type of conversations.
Yeah, I think that's crucial, is that making sure they understand their responsibility and taking the accountability
Yes.
for it. I remember being taught at the Senior Enlisted Academy, and that was probably too late. And it's one of the reasons why that inspired me to kind of the need to write this petty officer's guide. And that whole chapter on performance feedback gets into this. They taught us this model of like, and now you are getting into the more directive. This is more formal. This is less, hey, we're just out at the event huddling everyone up. I see a big enough deficiency in you that I'm going to pull you off one-on-one and sit you down and get your attention. But they're like, hey, set the conditions, have the room clear. You don't do this in front of other people, kind of thing. But then first thing is identify the behavior, what the negative outcomes are, and the feeling, the way it's making you feel. So, hey, you continue to do this because you're doing this. Here's the impact on you or the team or me. And here's how it's making us feel. What's going on, right? So what's going on throws it back over to them. And then from there, that's what you're trying to do, to get them to acknowledge, take responsibility. And then together, again, this isn't like, you don't have to be a complete asshole at them, right? You're trying to get them to figure out what is the root cause here, right? So we're trying to figure out like, this is not productive for you, not for the team, not for me. What is going on? And get them to acknowledge and accept that. And then once you've got that, then it's like, okay, what's your plan going forward from there? And how can I help you? And then, in some cases you start to document at that point, and it's not documentation to like, I think people get wrapped up in that. Oh God, I've got paper on you now,
Yeah.
right? It's actually to put your performance plan in writing so you can follow up on it, right?
Yes.
Am I off on that?
No, absolutely. Again, specific goals. This is where we want you to be at a certain time, and so that they don't forget either. Especially if they are maybe emotional or down on themselves in that coaching time that you have with them, putting it down on paper kind of sets that roadmap for them, kind of allow them to go be upset for a while, but now back to reality. Now I can go back and, okay, we talked about this, maybe I need to do this better. And that sense of ownership that you talked about, I think very important in that. One other thing you mentioned, and it's just, you tickle my mind again on this, is that there's going to be times as a coach, as a mentor, that you're going to have to yell, especially if there's a safety issue that's involved or there's something that's going to come up. And I think part of that follow-up coaching session later is maybe acknowledging that's one of the first things. Hey man, I didn't mean to yell out there, didn't mean to scream, or I screamed and sounded off because, and kind of explain where that comes from as a coach. And again, I think it helps back to define, hey man, this is nothing personal. This is just business. And part of our business, a lot of what we do is dangerous work. And sometimes you got to be able to do that. But if you clarify it, I think especially today's, younger sailors, they need to be able to hear that, just to remove that filter so that you can get into that conversation piece that we talk about and all these different tips to help them be better.
Yeah. Awesome. And then one other point that just came to mind. So back to situational leadership, weaving into performance, counseling or a counseling session. So again, you're doing this and you're assessing their willingness and ability to take ownership for that and correct, right? So you might find that they're not willing to, for whatever attitude, they just don't want to get on board with taking responsibility. Oh, then I'm going to get directive, right? You're not going to create the action plan. I'm going to direct the action plan, and here's what you will do. Or maybe you have to go to a coaching style of like, well, here's what I suggest. Like, or is that the best you can do? Or is there anything else you can do?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe, hey, I acknowledge it. I'm screwed up. Here's what I need to do. I recognize it. And, are there any other resources you recommend? Right. So now you're getting into supporting, delegating, even within a performance counseling session.
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
right.
That's what I love about Sit Lead. I mean, I wish,
Yeah.
we would do more of that, and have to go back and occasionally listen in on your previous podcast when you talked about these that different tool. I guess the one thing I was going to say this for the end, but I think it's applicable here, is when you're adjusting your leadership styles like that, always remember that it's to the task that, or the, the goal, whatever the mission, whatever it is that individual or the team is doing, that you are going to use that kind of leadership from, that your different kind of coaching skills. It's to that task and not just the person as a whole. And one of the things that we always learned in Sit Lead is that you see a non-performing sailor and say, "Oh yeah, that guy's a D1." No. Hold on, that's not what we're talking about here. It's when you're doing that assessment, it's to each task. Many of our people are great at doing one thing and horrible at the other, and all the way up to us old guys. We're all the same way. That's the beauty of that assessment, is being able to assess it to that particular situation.
Yeah, we're all D1 in something, right? And I think I'm going to get to
Well,
that point you were touching on here. So let's get into whether coaching, performance feedback, man. What are some of the do's and don'ts when you're involved in this activity or this responsibility?
well, again, the do's, I think we kind of touched on it earlier, setting up the right time, the right environment for it. And I think most importantly is be clear on what that conversation is. Are we putting somebody on paper because they've had a few times that we have tried to coach them, that we have tried to mentor them, and it's just not, picking up? Um, Sometimes you can document things, and I don't think we do this enough, to document the great stuff that they're doing, to simply recognize and say, man, you have come a long way in 2 weeks, 30 days, whatever that time frame is. And now from that point, now here's what we can do more. And again, back to the coaching skills we talked about, give them other things to think about, give them self-reflection so that they can become better in the future. Um, you know, you can coach in a midterm counseling, you can coach in a performance evaluation, feedback that you're given, the session that you're having. I think a lot of that is expectation management as well, though. um, as you're kind of having the conversation, what is it that we're trying to get to at the end of this talk, whatever it is, whether it's coaching, whether it's giving formal feedback, whether you're documenting something, and making sure they understand what that end result is as well. And it gives that coach, again, the ability to drive that conversation where it needs to go, and be able to read and assess what their the recipient is, how they're demonstrating it, how they're feeling it, the feedback they're giving back. I think that kind of kind of acknowledges why the reason we're having this type of conversation, for whatever reason it is.
Okay. What about the don'ts? What things would you say to, leaders who are given performance feedback? What things should you avoid doing or not do?
The biggest one I would probably say is the comparison piece. Hey, I used to do it this way, or I did, and my way is right and your way is not right. Again, you can shape that conversation because you may have things that you've done that was correctly, but in that coaching type of conversations that you're having, the goal is to get that information out there for them to get to see how they're going to use it to make themselves better. So I think that, especially if you're doing the type coaching type of situation, as we talked about before, stay away from the mentorship side, stay away from this is the only way you do it, or I used to do it this way and I was right, you're wrong. Instead, introduce that information for them, to give them an aha moment, and hopefully they can build from that. Obviously, the talking down, the the holier than thou type of front that you may give, or you're just, again, also your tone of voice, the way you're talking to them, the way, if are you talking too much, are you not giving them an opportunity to share, why maybe they did what they did, and kind of lead that conversation that way. I think those are all important pieces of having these types of conversation with the individuals.
Yeah, great points. Yeah, I wrote down don't attack the person, right? So this is what you were getting at, right? Address the task or the behavior, right? So people are many things, but they are good at certain things or not. So don't just attack the person. Don't lose emotional control. Have you seen that before?
Oh yeah, emotional control on both sides. And I think that's important too, is that, again, for some people who are very emotional or wear their emotions on their sleeve, and yet now they're trying to give that conversation, you have to stay as neutral as you can with that. Or let's turn that around. The recipient takes things very personal, takes it upon themselves, and now you start seeing the waterworks come in, or the complete shutdown, won't say a word to you type of situation. Um, you have to be able to know, hey, is it time for a quick break? Do I need to give you a couple minutes to kind of reset yourself and then come back in and restate what it is we were going to be talking about here, taking that emotional side out. um I see that a lot these days, and
No, that's true.
you have to
That's a
be
great, and
able to do that.
just to touch on that point, because that may be a reason why people would want to avoid feedback. They know, like, okay, this could definitely, as the person giving the feedback, I don't want to deal with the emotional repercussions, right? Or someone crying. And I remember that happened to me. Um, and to your point, there is a thing, it's like, all right, hey, let's take a break, go reset yourself, go take a few minutes, right? And then you bring them back in. And usually just doing that, they were able, and maybe they go out with their direct supervisor or whatever. Cause I always, that was another thing I did do is I didn't want this to be, and not from covering my ass kind of thing, but I think your direct person needs to be there too, right? Cause they're a coach. But I would have them there, and they'd go out together, they'd help them reset, come back in, and normally the conversation would go. So don't let that potential for that kind of emotional stuff. On the other end, fortunately, I've never been into the amplified screaming situation where both sides have lost it. I saw that. Um, those get really uncomfortable and crazy. Have you seen those? And what would you do with that situation?
Yeah, so I think, thankfully, I'd have to say, I don't think, yeah, maybe one or two, and again, depending on who it was, or maybe it wasn't so much a coaching situation as just an argument in the mess or something that's come up. I think the easiest way to diffuse an awkward situation like that, where you either can't get to the common point in the middle, you got one side versus the other, is simply just acknowledging to somebody, hey, you know what, you may be right. Or on a more humble approach, hey, I didn't see it that way. Maybe I need to think about this, and then you get back into stressing the points that you're trying to get to out of that conversation. Um, I think some of that humble pie works in situations like that. And again, you're not admitting fault. You're not admitting that you're all messed up as the coach, or vice versa, depending on what the situation is. But I think it's a good diffuser point, because now we acknowledge, okay, there's something in the middle that we both disagree at, but at least we're not at each other's throat. We're not king knife hands. We're not doing, and get back to having the conversation piece, the communication piece, to be able to get over that and move forward.
Awesome. And then, you've said this already, right? This is where you put your active listening skills, right? So be open to the other person's perspective, right? You're trying to figure out what's going on here. So you got to stop, listen, don't just pause to speak. Um, Regardless of what behavior you've seen, right? People have a story. So you're trying to figure out what that story is. They're late all the time. Okay. Well, maybe something happened at home that you find out, like, oh, being late's the last of their issues.
Mm.
you know, their spouse, is having some kind of thing or whatever underlying cause. And now you find that conversation going in a different, you're shifting that role now to something different and you're supporting your person. I've had that happen several times. And then you brought up about empathy. So empathy is important. Be empathetic, but I don't think you coddle, and you have to ensure accountability is taken.
Yeah, absolutely. Be empathetic, not sympathetic. I think one other thing that is good, and sometimes you need to do this in coaching, is not just active listening, but pregnant pauses are good to have as well. Especially if you strike a good point and you just need that, that protege, that mentor, that person being coach or coaching partner, to just listen and think about that. Because again, back to self-awareness, ooh, maybe not. Or you can also just sit and just kind of stare at them and look at them to force them. Because again, nobody likes to be stared at. Nobody likes to be in these conversations, and the onus is back on you. And I'm just sitting there kind of looking, waiting for something from you. That's going to force somebody to talk, because that awkward, they just don't like those awkward pauses. So that's another effective tool, is again in a coaching type of conversation, to just help them reflect.
All right, I'm gonna take an awkward pause. No. You've been staring at me the whole time. I'm uncomfortable. No, I'm good. All
Sounds
right.
like
So I think that's a great.
a
Yeah. So I think we've also offered a lot of again ton of great advice. There's more of that. Again, there's content in the Petty Officer's Guide on this. But Toby, what other resources or things would you recommend to people that want to learn more about how to be a better coach, mentor, and how to get performance feedback?
So they're offering. We're seeing more and more of the My Navy coaching um, tools and courses that are being offered through NPC. So if you get over to a Navy Personnel Command, you can get on to my.navy.mil, and there's links over to the NPC website. Gets into My Navy coaching. Great resources there. Excuse me. As the Navy's ELD website, netsy.navy.mil /ELD. Sorry, I'm losing my voice here. There's some tools that we offer there as well to help for coaching conversation starters, as well as being able to recognize when do you need these types of conversations between mentoring versus coaching and versus feedback.
Yeah, awesome. I didn't even know. That's good to know that those are out there. So hey, for the Navy folks listening, there's a great resource for you. All right, Toby. Now that you're losing your voice on me now too, so you're making me feel awkward. You're staring at me, and now you've lost your voice. So that's going to have to be the point where we wrap this. 2 episodes. I do appreciate your time. Are you sure you want to do another episode?
Hell yeah, man! Anytime, every
All
time.
right.
I'm
Good.
again grateful to be a part of this, Paul. Thank you again for all that you're continuing to do. I said this last time. You're retired, but you're still serving, and we all benefit from it. So thank you so much for all the great work you're doing on your end.
Yeah, thanks for your time. And then, it's absolutely rewarding to be able to continue to give back in a variety of ways. So, um, good luck to you. All right, everyone. That wraps it up for another edition of the Cutlass podcast and video. So thanks again. Check out the resources. I'm going to put those in the episode description. Got to make sure I do it. Again, if you like what you hear and you see, subscribe, share, comment, give me that feedback. Get this in front of people who you think would benefit from it. The goal is for you to improve. You can always learn whatever level. You can reflect on this, right? That's a big concept of the Chief Petty Officer and the Petty Officer's Guide. They're tools of self-reflection. These videos are like, hey, we're offering some advice. I can't tell you. I can't make you do it. Toby can't either. So hopefully we plant some seeds that make you want to do better and go seek some feedback and coaching from mentors and people that can make you better. Again, this is Paul Kingsbury. Work to keep that leadership cutlass sharp. And then take what you learn and go out and make a positive difference in the teams and the people you lead. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Hoorah.